Hey guys, in this video we're going to be going through Microsoft Visual Studio. And if you're like me, I have a very limited background in computer programming, and if you've taken a couple semesters of a computer science course, you've done a lot of for loops and do while loops and if statements, and you may have talked a bit about object-oriented programming. But the fact is, in the real world, we want to create very complex programs that have multiple executables and libraries, and you're dealing with different types of languages, and so things get extraordinarily complicated. And so the purpose of Microsoft Visual Studio is to kind of provide an IDE, an integrated development environment, where you can centralize everything into one place and make your life easier. And so the purpose of this video is going to be showing you how you can get started in Microsoft Visual Studio, and we're going to create a very basic application that you can actually run on your computer. And so right after you install Microsoft Visual Studio, this is going to be your home page. And so what you're going to do to start is go to File, New, and Project. And so projects define applications. If we were to look at Microsoft Word is going to consist of a bunch of DLLs, these dynamically linked libraries that are going to consist of classes and all these functions, and these are going to be shared between multiple executables that make up the Microsoft Word program. And so basically Microsoft Word would exist if you were working on it as a project. So you're going to create a project, and for this one we're going to call the name Hello World, and the solution name or the project name is going to be my first solution. And so the solution or project is nothing more than a collection of a lot of stuff that make up that singular entity. So it's kind of a way of organizing your projects because you will have many libraries and executables and other things associated with it. And so before I click OK here, another important thing to make a note of is which one of these you click on. And so we're going to be creating a console application, and it's going to be making use of the .NET Core. And this .NET Core is a very important thing to understand and have background on. And so basically when Java came around in the late 90s, early 2000s, Microsoft was getting screwed because Java was cross-platform and it made life easy for developers to make an application that could run on a phone, on a fridge, on a computer. It was very hardware and software agnostic. And so Microsoft needed to centralize a lot of and standardize a lot of their definitions, like how do you allocate memory for an integer or a bool or a string, and how do you begin to be a lot more integrated. And so .NET was a response to Java, and until recently Microsoft has been pretty isolated and excluded from a lot of the environments, in that Microsoft really wants you to stay within the Microsoft environment, so they were not cross-platform. But until Satya Nadella, the new CEO, came in, he has advocated to make Microsoft much more open and cross-platform. So .NET Core is essentially a distillation of a lot of the features and methods and classes that Microsoft has developed, and they are making it cross-platform. And so being able to write console applications in .NET Core using C# is a very important skill to have, because as a developer, it makes your job incredibly easy to create a product that performs consistently on Mac OS and Windows and Android and iOS and Linux. So it does make life very simple. And so I'm going to click here. We're going to be built using the .NET Core. And then .NET, to reiterate, is essentially you're going to be using Microsoft's framework. And the framework is the collection of DLLs, the libraries that Microsoft engineers have spent hundreds of hours developing to perform common tasks, so that if you've fully read the documentation and you understand what these functions can do, you don't need to reinvent the wheel every time you create a new application. And so with that out of the way, we're going to be using the console app .NET Core, and we've named what our little program is going to be. We've also named what the larger project as a whole is going to be called, so that if we wanted to build on this later, we could. So we're going to click OK here. And so it will take a few seconds to create it, but once it has, we can begin to look at the template that Microsoft has given us in Visual Studio. And so the very first thing you're going to make a note of is that on line 1, we're doing this using system command. And so what this essentially tells us is that we are going to call the DLL, which stands for the dynamically linked library, called system. And system is going to consist of a bunch of methods that we will be able to call later on within our actual program. Moving on down here, what we have is a namespace. And another keynote to make when you're getting new or being exposed to Visual Studio for the first time is these blue markings. So if you see a word in blue, it means that it is reserved. So basically, I can't go out and make a var and var v gets using. That would be a problem because it's a reserved word within this IDE, so you don't do that. And so moving on, namespace. The purpose of namespace is it's going to be an environment, a place where classes can live. So a class, if you're talking about object-oriented programming, objects will be instances of these classes. Classes are essentially a blueprint for creating objects. And so as we move through our code, another thing that you're always going to have within your program is a main function. And main is going to be the very first function that is called when you run your executable. And so as you're doing the pseudocode and thinking about how your program is going to run, you need to focus on main. Void is telling us that main will not be returning anything in this case, and we can supply an array of strings as arguments to our main function. And so currently all this thing is doing is writing hello world to us, but we can get a little bit fancier and have this thing ask us for what our name is. And so we're going to do console, we're going to change what this is outputting to what is your name, and then we will define a string called n to store what comes from this. So this will be console.readLine, and essentially now what it's going to do is store whatever string comes in the console. Finally, we'll just essentially copy this code, and we're going to say console hello, and then concatenate that with the string that we have just stored. And because we don't want to blast through our program immediately, what we're going to do is finalize this with a console.readKey. And so essentially this will stop the console from getting terminated until user responds. And so this is the gist of our function. And so what we can do is we can press this little green button here, or you can press F5 on the keyboard to actually build your program. And we can test it out. My name is Vincent, and we can see that it says hello Vincent, and right now it is doing the read key part of this. And so if I type any key, it'll go away. And another key thing to make a note of with Visual Studio is it is a very powerful tool, because if, let's say I forgot what right line meant, if I go here and I highlight the word and I select it, if I press F12 on the keyboard, it will take me to the little function description that the Microsoft engineers have written regarding this particular method. And so it's telling me that it writes a specified string value. So Microsoft has done an excellent job providing documentation, all this stuff. There is also the articles online, which are very useful. So this is a good tool to know about. And in addition to that, there is something called debugging. And so if you wanted to know where a problem was within your code, what you can do is you can tell Visual Studio to run this program line by line. And the way you do that is by pressing the F11 key. And so pressing F11, we'll see we have this little arrow come here. And what this arrow is telling us is that this line is about to be executed, but it has not yet been executed. So when I press F11 again, it tells me how much time has passed. I'm going to press F11 one more time. It's about to execute the actual invocation of the console. And so if I open up here, that was something else. We have the console right here where we can go and actually type in our name. We have it reading the line right now. So if I press F11, I'm being told that I do need to put in my name. So my name will now be John. And it is cool in that it tells you how many milliseconds have passed. But basically, you just keep pressing F11 and on this thing until you finish running through your program, and this helps you from crashing your computer while you're doing a debug session. And so that's going to wrap things up for this general introduction to Microsoft Visual Studio, the .NET Core framework, and how to write your very first program. I hope you guys find it useful, and thanks for watching.